Hey everybody, this is Matt. I want to talk a little bit about why Kalamazoo Banks don't give loans to black people. This is a glass of bourbon. Why don't Kalamazoo Banks give loans to black people? Well, for the same reason American banks don't and Michigan banks don't and never have. So I shared a very simple graph about the raw number of loans given to white people and black people in Kalamazoo. I tried to think of most of the banks in Kalamazoo, and the numbers are clearly problematic and shocking. The comparison of loans given to white people compared to black people is, you can just see it. You see a lot of loans to white people compared to black people, that is, and the loans given to black people are so small that you can barely even see most of them on the graph. In other words, they're a sliver, almost invisible to the naked eye, compared to the white people loans. Just a simple graph, just one data point. To anti-racist people that see a graph like that, what we do is immediately the reaction is sadness, anger, depression, but not surprise. Not surprise. So for an anti-racist person, and that's of course a scale, the more anti-racist you get that way, the less surprise you get that way, right? But you have all those other emotions and thoughts, and when an anti-racist person sees a graph like that, it's meant to be shocking, of course, but an anti-racist person then goes beyond that to sit down and unpack all the oppression, all the various levels of oppression that go into that one graph. So it's, for an anti-racist person, it's not just contemplating how horrible it is that Kalamazoo banks are not giving loans to black people. First of all, we contemplate on that first, because that's horrible in and of itself. So we sit with that for a while. We think of the white institutions and white banks not giving out loans to black people and how horrible that is. But then we bring rich context to it. We go out and we think ourselves and we do our own work and think about all the other levels of oppression that go into that. In other words, all the levels of anti-black oppression that don't have anything to do with the white banks not giving out loans to black people. We think of the underlying causes and all the other stuff that makes it even worse in ways we can't even imagine. That's what we do. That's what anti-racist people do. We think of the fact that redlining is still going on in America, in Michigan and Kalamazoo, whether it's illegal or not. Right? There was the data that the graph came from was what's called HMDA data, Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. Maybe we contemplate on that. The Home Mortgage Disclosure Act was passed in Michigan in 1977. Let's see, my father was born in 1960, so I guess he was 17 years old. About to have my slightly older brother when Michigan was finally getting their asses to pass what they called an anti-redlining law, 1977. They thought that if you forced Kalamazoo banks and Michigan banks to at least disclose who they were denying loans to, they would stop denying loans to black people. There was actually 3 banks in the area that didn't even do it. The law passed in 1977 and they said, no, we're not going to do that. But anyway, it didn't matter. They kept doing it. They just now disclosed it. So anti-racist people would look at my graph and think about the study, the really big study that Reveal's a website. They did an investigation of all these disclosure, because it was a federal thing too, so millions of disclosure documents have been analyzed, and guess what? Black people ain't getting loans. And it's not a simple study. They're controlling for variables, obviously. They're controlling for things like income. They're not just making a case, they're not just saying black people are getting denied loans without figuring out that it's racism. It's racism that they're not getting. It's the color of the person's skin, not their income. So they control for those variables, of course. So that's what we would think about when we're just looking at a simple graph of loans given out to black and white people in Kalamazoo. Everyone else has all these other reactions. So many reactions you can have besides the anti-racist feelings and reactions. And this isn't a binary. People can have anti-racist reactions and thoughts, and then they can switch over to the other side and have racist thoughts or racism light thoughts, and we're all mixed up. Many of us are confused. But the first reaction is to automatically switch the burden of proof to the other side. That's the first reaction. Need your source, need more data, this doesn't prove that, this is out of context, etc., etc. Can you tell me that? I need that. No, I demand that. You see that? It's a burden of proof situation. The burden of proof is no longer on black people or anti-racist people or researchers to prove that white people are racist and that white institutions are still racist. No, 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 no. How old is this country? What, 400 years or whatever? They've been proving it the whole time. That's been proven on multiple levels, multiple years, multiple centuries and decades. No, we're done. The burden of proof is on white people and white institutions to somehow prove that what they're doing, their normal operating procedure, is somehow miraculously not racist. That's the burden of proof. Banks giving out loans to human beings, you prove to people that you're not racist. How about that? How about the burden of proof is on that? Because that's what's always been the case when black people and anti-racist people have studied your ass. So I think it's funny how the reaction to like a graph like that is automatically to shift the burden of proof away from what? It's to always shine a light on white innocence. In this case, the white bankers, the banks, the white banks. You have to immediately shift. You have to project innocence onto these human beings. Because why? Because they must be not racist, because they're humans, right? They must not be intentionally evil people. That's what that means, right? We have this idea of what a racist is, this idea that came after the civil rights movement, this colorblind movement, that racism is a moral failure of white people. It's moral corruption, actually, to be racist. So if to be a racist is to be morally corrupt, A, and B, my friend Jimmy or Dick or Bob or Harry is clearly not a bad person, he's not morally corrupt, B, then it therefore follows every single time that Harry, Dick, and Bob is not a racist. Not a racist bone in his body, to be honest. He's a not racist. That idea of racist and racism is laughable. It makes no sense. Racism is personal, it's interpersonal, it's systemic, it's cultural, it's historical, it's everything. If you don't think there's racist bankers, are you kidding me? There could theoretically be a banker at First National Bank, downtown, right now. There could be gentleman, banker, loan proprietor, someone on the board. There could be a banker, theoretically. There could be a banker that's there right now giving loans, and his dad could have been a man named Henry Firth. Firth, F-I-R-T-H. Henry Firth was a banker that lived on Long Road, a wealthy little road tucked behind the Vine neighborhood. And Henry Firth was a banker during the 30s and the 40s, and I think the 50s. But anyway, he was a banker who lived on Long Road during a time where it was state-sponsored segregation. In other words, he's dishing out loans to white people in white spaces and refusing to dish out home loans to black people or black spaces. And all the while, he's on Long Road with a team of black domestic servants, one of which was Elma Powell, the person that became the library. He had his hand dipped in domestic servitude because, people wouldn't hire black people at the time. And he was a loan proprietor at the same time. He was actively, violently creating the wealth gap under ideas like that black people were hazardous, violent intruders. There could be a person working at First National Bank today that was his dad, right? But we don't want to think that bankers are racist and not giving out loans to black people intentionally. We don't want to think that, no. It's got to be something else. No, it is something else. It's also that too. It's many, many things, but that's one of them. You don't think a banker could be racist? Come on. It's like you don't think a cop could be racist? And then there's a menagerie of excuses. Again, the whole point of all these thoughts and ideas, and people are confused, I get it, is to shift the blame. Well, actually, it's two things. It's to make the bank innocent somehow. The white banker's innocent. It's also to shift the blame onto black people. It's to shift the attention onto black people. That's what it is. Instead of sitting with the white oppression and racism, that's what's happening. So another thing is, you show me a graph of the loans that were given, but what's really important is to know that black people aren't applying, right? How many people applied? Yeah, I get it. That's already been studied, by the way. But black people aren't applying for loans. That's a real problem. That's the real problem. They're not applying for loans. Of course they're not. I mean, first of all, you've just skipped over the fact that black people are applying for loans and getting denied the loans. That's what the issue is. So that's the issue. Black people are applying for loans and getting denied to loans compared to their white counterparts. That's actually the issue. But yeah, what's your point? There's a low, black people aren't applying for loans at the same rate as white people. Yeah, of course, because of our history. Actually, black people don't trust banks. That's really the issue. Again, pivoting away from the white bankers, right? Because they're innocent. We have to talk about something else immediately. No, black people don't trust banks. That's the real issue. It's a cultural thing. Well, black people are as rational as any racial group in the world. So yeah, you're damn right. Why would they? As a group, of course. We're talking generally. Banks have never been friends to black people. They've been enemies. White banks have been enemies to black people ever since 1865. They've been played by banks the whole time. Different predatory schemes after another. Excluded and preyed upon. 1865 emancipation happened, black people were asked what they actually wanted. And by black people, let's be honest, it was probably black men. It was a commission probably of black men. And you've heard it. 40 acres and a mule. Yes, that's what they asked for. That's what they wanted. They said, we want some damn property away from these white people because they're way too violent. They were separatists. These white people are way too violent. There's no way in hell we're not living next to them. We want our own 40 acres and a mule, which, by the way, I think we deserve. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to work it. We're going to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We're going to do what no white people has ever done in this country. We're going to be the first bootstrap story. That's what they wanted. White people did not give them that. They gave them a quote-unquote black bank, the first betrayal. By black bank, I mean black people worked there. White people, for the most part, designed and controlled what it could and could not do. It was a glorified piggy bank. It was paternalistically teaching black people thrift. You know, they have to learn how to save their money before they're going to really make money. And by that I mean the bank was designed in such a way that the bank couldn't gain wealth. There's a book called The Color of Money that goes through tons of detail about how that actually operates. Then and now, how do banks create wealth? Well, that bank couldn't create wealth. It was a piggy bank. And black people saved money, a lot of money. And then white people ruined the bank. Eventually, speculative white people ruined the bank, and black people lost money. That was the first so-called black bank. And then skip to the 50 years of the greatest state-sponsored home ownership program for white people at the exclusion of black people. White people were told to move away from black people to gain wealth through home ownership, and black people were forced to rent and take very risky, predatory land contracts from white speculators and fearmongers for 50 years. And then 2007, 2008, another predatory lending scheme to black potential homeowners where black people were given terrible loans, not always because of their income, but because of racism, to largely have a big thing to do with the housing crash of 2007, 2008, which what did it do? It wiped out half of black wealth, just like that. Half of black wealth due to predatory housing practices because of banks and policies, just like that, wiped out. So why wouldn't black people trust banks? I wonder why. And banks are also discriminating against black people today. You see how these are all true at the very same time? And this isn't a reductionist conversation. No, I think it's actually just black people don't know about homeownership, right? It's just a cultural thing. Homeownership's a big responsibility, and no, I don't think black people are up to the task. It's a cultural thing. Okay, first of all, if you ever say that about a racial group, you better have loads of freaking data to back that up, right? Again, a burden of proof question. You better prove that that's true before you make that assessment, that assumption, that assessment, that statement. Black people don't know how to own a home. Come on. But actually, let's just say that's true. Let's say it's true that somehow white people, comparatively, have more home ownership savvy and skills than black people. Okay, I wonder why. Oh my gosh. And again, if you make these statements, you better ask the question why, and you better have an answer. You can't just say, black people don't know how to own a home without an explanation? Okay, let's dive. I wonder, is it because white people were coddled and provoked and pleaded to be homeowners away from black people? Could that be part of the reason, maybe, if white people have an edge? Maybe this began in the 1920s with the Hoover administration pleading for white people to get the hell out of the inner city, away from the black people, into the suburbs and the exurbs, and to own their own homes. And don't be communist either, like those inner city people. Could it be that they were suckled at the teat of the government for 50 years to learn how to become homeowners? Could it be that? Through federal policy, state policy, local organizations, banks, the city, the county, the building associations, the realtors, all of it. Get this, in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, I'm not sure when it stopped, to be honest, the Kalamazoo Gazette, every single Saturday for decades, probably 50 years at least, every Saturday issue had a 2-page spread teaching white people how to own their own homes. What's the program? What's the homeownership? FHA. Okay, what's it going to cost? This is your monthly payment. This is the lumber you have to buy. Advertisements. Get a one-on-one consultation at the city hall. This is when you need to do it. Right? 50 years, every Saturday in the paper, a 2-page spread on how to own your home. Oh, advertisements from a developer saying our restrictions are great against black people. Wink, wink. Could it be? Is that why home ownership is part of white culture? Is that why today 76% of people, white people in Michigan own their homes, but only 40% of black people do? Is that why white culture is essentially home ownership? Is that why white people can't stop talking about their homes and their patio projects and their kitchens and all that? Yeah, it is part of white culture because of white policy. That makes sense, doesn't it? I think it's just because black people are poor, right? That explains why black people aren't getting any loans in Kalamazoo. It's just because they're poor. First of all, it doesn't explain why black people are disproportionately getting denied loans compared to white people. Like, can we please learn the meaning of disproportionately? It means that America's portioning out shit. So they're portioning out good stuff, and they're portioning out way too much to white people, and they're not portioning out hardly anything to black people. That's what that means. It's a ratio thing. It's a likelihood thing. Disproportionate in terms of oppression. It means America's disproportioning oppression or something bad out to the American public, and gosh, they're just giving so much more to team black than to team white. That's what that means. So if you're white, you're less likely to know someone who's being proportioned out the shit. If you're black, you're more likely to know somebody that's been proportioned out that shit. So just reducing it to a class issue makes no sense, because all the research from Reveal, studying the millions of disclosure documents, it didn't say that. It said it was racial. Of course, class compounds things. So what you mean to say, and my second point is that, okay, you say black people are poor. Well, okay, there's also a black middle class, there's a black upper middle class, there's black millionaires and billionaires. But I get what you're saying. As a group, I get it. Black people are poor in comparison to white people. Yes. But what you mean to say, what you really mean to say, you mean to explain why black people are poor, I think, I hope. Don't just say it. Black people are poor because white people haven't hired them. White institutions, white companies, not hiring black people. Black person has a black name, your application isn't getting seen. That's already been studied. Not hiring, promoting, creating a safe environment, employment. That's what you mean. That's why black people are poor. Okay, I get you now. Black people are poor because there was a 50-year home ownership program for white people where they got to gain lower monthly payments and wealth, where black people got segregated and had to rent to slumlords and take shady land contracts to try to own their home, and then they miss it, and the black tax and all that. Okay, that's what you mean, black. That's why black people are poor. Okay, black people are poor because when the affordable housing crisis hit, it was really a black issue. And insofar as our cities and our towns and our counties and our states didn't create affordable housing, insofar as they failed to serve affordable housing needs, oh, that's why black people are poor. Okay, I get it. You mean to say black people are poor because the housing crash crushed black people and their wealth? That's what you mean. You mean black people, there's a racist housing system feeding a racist education system. And black people aren't getting the education that white kids are getting disproportionately, and even if they do, they still face the job discrimination. So they have to break through that barrier as well to get a decent income. Oh, okay, that's why black people are poor. Okay, I get it. But white bankers, they can't be racist. Not anymore, at least, because we have all these systems in place. They're so objective, like the credit score or the loan application. It's very, the person is really taken out of it, right? Again, this is all about innocence. This is all about white innocence, right? That's the whole point of this pivot. No, the systems are racist. There's no such thing as an objective system. So the credit score is a perfect example. There's a book at the library that you can get if you get a library card. It's free. It's called The Weapons of Math Destruction. The Weapons of Math Destruction. It's about how these so-called, written by a badass white woman, it's about how these so-called, objective systems like the credit score, there's a chapter on different systems, but every system is built by human beings, and the assumptions are built into the system. And the assumptions, insofar as they're racist, will have the same output. Racism evolves just like anti-racism does. Racism evolves. The credit score system is an evolved racist tactic to make it so that black people have a terrible credit score. I'm pretty certain zip code somehow comes into play of the credit score system. You can fact check me on that, or go to the library and read up on it. So there are no, particularly when white people are creating the systems, there are no objective systems like that. So why do Kalamazoo Banks not give loans to black people? Imagine a white banker, Harry, talking to another white banker. Oh my gosh, I've noticed, I hate to say it, but a shocking pattern. We don't seem to be giving loans to black folks. And his friend is like, really? Oh my God. I wonder if we maybe should do something about that. Oh, yeah, maybe. Well, see you on the golf course tomorrow. You and your family have a lovely Christmas. In other words, they don't give a shit. They don't care. They're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to go out of their way to address the problem on a systemic level. They're not going to do anything about it. They don't care. They're going to do the same thing they've always been doing and not care. Right? That's what equity means, actually caring about that and doing something about it and understanding the history, and that something has to change. You don't think Kalamazoo Banks could do something about that? Just themselves. Forget about all the other systems around banks. Just the banks themselves could do something incredibly different than what they're doing with all the money that they have. But they don't give a shit.